Welcome to Cure America. I am Donald T. Eason, the newest member of the executive team here at Cure. I have the privilege and the honor to sit here with Pastor Steve Perry of the We Church, which is World Encounter Church in Detroit, Michigan. He's come our way for the inaugural. So I'm gonna ask Pastor Steve a few questions about his experiences here in Washington, D.C., and what he thinks about our new president. And so Pastor Steve, thank you. Thank you for being here with us.
Thanks for having me here in D.C. with you on the day at this inauguration event. You guys have been a wonderful host. Man, I think I done ate so much. I need an ambulance to get out of here, but we doing well.
Well, excellent, Steve. We know we switched things around a little bit. They moved the inaugural from outside to inside, so we at Cure had an open house, and Steve was gracious enough to stop by and spend some time with us. And so what do you think about the inauguration of Donald J. Trump as the 47th president of these United States?
Yeah, I think first off, we know what leadership looks like, right? You know, when I was in the military, one of the things that they told me that leader is one that provides purpose, direction, and motivation. And, no disrespect to the Dems, but, President Biden really didn't show that. You know, he showed a lot of sickness, and stuff like that. But President Trump showed strong leadership. It was very clear in where he wanted us to go as a country. Mm-hmm. And some of those things I think we needed as a country, because I think we went too far to the left in these last couple of years. And people really was confused. As much as they tried to say that they wasn't, they were really confused about how they wanted to live their life or what to do. Mm-hmm. But I think these next 4 years, if nothing else, is the most important thing to this country is that we have clarity now on where we want to go, what we want to do. And I think in terms of leadership, we have that now in President Donald J. Trump.
Excellent. And President Trump has said he wants to be the president for all Americans.
That's right. Yep.
And you being a pastor in the inner city, in a big city, very African-American populated city like Detroit, yep. Do you think Donald Trump's presidency will make Detroit a better city or help make Detroit a better city? I think with some of the policies that's coming down, especially when you start talking about manufacturing, Detroit is probably one of the greatest cities in America when it comes to manufacturing. With Henry Ford, most black people migrated from the South to the North just to have manufacturing jobs. Even when we think about Detroit being one of the richest cities in the world in the 1950s, if not the richest city in the world in the 1950s, 1948 Detroit most definitely was. Absolutely.
They even went for a bid for the Olympics in the 1940s. I think that for a place like Detroit, even though Detroit is a strong Democratic stronghold, and even though people don't see it, I think brighter days are coming because you already got an environment that's used to manufacturing lifestyle. You got generations of families that's familiar with manufacturing. Mm-hmm. And so, I think for a place like Detroit, we have not seen our best days, and they are ahead of us in ways that we didn't see. And so it was wonderful to hear that he has a plan for places like Detroit, yeah. And we look at places like East Chicago and these small towns that were built off of manufacturing during the industrial period. I think that this is going to really be wonderful. These next couple of years, I think not only did he provide structure in this speech today, but I think also that he provided hope for people.
Absolutely.
And so for people that's probably figuring out how they're going to pay their bills, if they're going to be able to afford car notes and payments, and and stuff like that. From a macro perspective, especially in the next couple of months, you're going to see a lot of that changing within the next year or so, because of the policies and the initiatives of President Donald J. Trump.
So you think when we talk about manufacturing, we talk about Detroit at one time being the richest city in the world, the leader in the auto industry. Do you think? And I do know that a lot of the unions in Michigan voted for Donald Trump as So do you think now with him heading the Republican Party that they will be the party for the working class?
Yeah, I think something has changed in our fundamental classism in America, especially once we had the economic downturn in 2006 to 2009. When I came out the military in 2006, I was looking for work, and as a result of that, I couldn't find work, so I was homeless for a period of time. When I first came back out of the military. And so I think America at that time was going through a crisis, because before that, everybody always voted liberal, because it was felt that they cared about the working class.
Right.
I think what happened when President Obama, that's why they voted him in, because they was hoping that it was going to be more about the working class. Nothing changed.
Right.
The first time when President Trump came in, things changed, and people were able to actually afford car notes and things of that nature. And then here it is, we had 4 hard years financially in this country, and then now we're getting ready. The hope is for a lot of people now is that they can take care of their families. So when we start talking about the working class, I think that the working class is very, very happy, because they can start pointing themselves on the course of having the American dream. The last 4 years have been more of the American nightmare for people financially. And so I think, people are optimistic that they'll be able to take care of their families, and not only their families, but that their children might have an opportunity to provide the same type of life that they were trying to provide for them.
Yeah, it's been said that our generation, or the generation after us, might be the first generation that did not do better than their parents. So you think with Donald J. Trump being in office now as the new president, that these next generations will have an opportunity to do at least as good as, or hopefully better than their parents. And was it any 1, 2, or 3 items that President Trump mentioned as inaugural that you might want to highlight that stood out for Pastor Steve Perry?
Yeah, so while I was listening to the address, we were first off, we have to give Pastor Lorenzo Sewell a shout out, because where that brother prayed, and if you know anything about Detroit and the black church, he put it all together today.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did.
He did that. But we also wanted to point out the fact that number one, I think he's making a great decision to deal with this cartel thing. 2017, I lost my mother to a drug overdose.
Oh, sorry to hear that.
And so, we don't know whether it was because of fentanyl or because of her many years of struggling with drugs. All I could think about was my mother, and for the last 40 years, we've been struggling with drugs really, really bad in the inner cities. So I thank God that President Trump is taking leadership to deal with it from a macro perspective, deal with it right at the issue, and putting the military and involving them with that. Number 2, we cannot doubt the power of America's manufacturing thing. So, we pretty much live in the last 200 years, we pretty much have had 3 economies. We had the agrarian economy, that's where slavery and all that other stuff come from, and then farmers, then it grew into the industrial economy, and then now we're going into the artificial intelligence economy, right? Yeah. And so one thing I appreciate, we haven't completely turned over into the artificial intelligence economy, but what we did is that we've secured the people that's been doing industrialism for 100 years, still have that going on. And I believe with Doge, and you bring in people on like Elon Musk and Ravi Ramaswamy on board, people that have an idea about tech and stuff like that can slowly take our country into the next couple of generations transferring from industrial economy into the artificial intelligence economy. So I can see that kind of being set up with the speech today. But most importantly, the number one thing is that we now have clarity. We now have clarity. I'm not saying that leadership, both of us are pastors, you the president of the organization, you can't tackle all problems, okay?
Right,
but
right.
You try to tackle what you can from where you at with the expertise and the experience that you have. And from a leader's perspective, we got clarity of what it is, where we're going as a country, what we're going to do, how we're going to do it. And it was very, very clear on that. It wasn't political jargon. It wasn't word salad. It was straight to the point. And this is what we're going to do. And so I appreciate that he's giving me confidence in the fact that he knows what he wants to do. And because he's been president before, he knows how he wants to do it.
Absolutely. And the American people voted him in.
That's right.
That's really a mandate for his policies and the things that he espoused to the American people. And you mentioned something, and sorry to hear what you said about your mom, and the drug crisis here, especially in our inner cities. Do you think his policies on the border will help get some of these issues out of our communities?
Yeah, I think one thing for sure that's going to happen with this in mind is that, number one, as we think about the policies and and stuff like that. First off, let's be very clear about what he said. He's going after illegal immigrants.
Right.
Okay. These are people that have come into the country illegally.
And those be the ones that's probably pushing the drugs,
That's
right?
the ones because they're going to push the narrative that he's talking about immigrants. Period. That's not what he said. Okay. He said illegal immigrants. That means that people that came into this country without going through the process.
Absolutely.
So we're not discriminating against people that want to come into this free world, come into the best country in the world. Is people that did not do it the right way.
Absolutely.
The reason why they're doing it the wrong way is because of what they're bringing with them. We have a drug problem in America. If America stopped using drugs, we kill all cartels. We kill all the drugs that we can. Now, we know people are still going to do what they're going to do, but his responsibility is to lessen it as much as possible.
Right.
And to bring that down as much as possible. And so we thank God that he's provided that for us. And then number three, for people that's looking for jobs in America that say, hey, I've been having a hard time finding a job and stuff like that at a good rate. Now, this is your time, to show what your value is through hard work and knowledge and things of that nature. So you get a fair shot, without all of this stuff that's kind of these distractions, to provide a good life for your family.
Amen. Amen. Well, we've said a mouthful today, but the beauty is we do have a president that has shown that he is for the American people, and he's not against all immigrants, because we're a nation of immigrants.
That's right.
He may have to kick us all out if that was the case, and we know he's not doing that. And how some of his policies definitely will help influence the urban communities, which CURE, we're here, the Center for Urban Renewal and Education. We'll have an opportunity to work with President Trump and hopefully help influence some of those policies and bring some of those changes that you mentioned back to the inner city. So, Pastor Steve, before we conclude this interview, is there any last words that you want to have or you want to share with our audience?
Yeah, I just want to, especially to people that may have a hard time with this, just listen to the man and then just watch the man. If you're tired of what you've been getting before, give this man the opportunity to change some things in your life. We all want a chance. We all make mistakes. We all have challenges in our lives. But he's in a position to help all of us. So let's stand with the man. Let's give him an opportunity to be heard. Let's see what he provides, as we already have seen. And listen, let's do it again in 2028.
Amen, amen. Well, Pastor C, what you just said is really a biblical mandate. The Bible tells us to pray for kings and all men everywhere that are in power in the book of Timothy, that we might lead a peaceable life. I think right now it's a time for America to pray for our president, pray for our country, pray for our nation. And again, we thank you so much for your time, for stopping by the CURE offices. And we look forward to the next time we can get together. And again, I'm Donald T. Eason, the newest member of the CURE's executive team. And we want to thank you for visiting with us today. And remember, it's not in man to direct his own footsteps, but in all your ways, acknowledge him, and he will direct your path. We're into another week of President Trump's second term, and it is a whirlwind of activity. Several more of his cabinet nominees have been confirmed. He has signed more executive orders. American prisoners unjustly held in Russia, Belarus, and even Venezuela have been released, and the Senate Budget Committee has passed a budget resolution to support President Trump's priorities on budget security, energy production, and national defense. We have a lot to talk about on the show. I am here today with our esteemed panel, Richard Manning to my left, Marty Dannelfeser, and Jonathan Alexandre. And gentlemen, it's been a lot going on in our country here lately. President Trump is another week into a second term. It's been a whirlwind week. He's how many executive orders now? Over 200. Over 200, yeah. and he's had some of his nominees have been confirmed, and he signed all of the executive orders, and we're getting a lot of pushback on some of them. And he's also man, I'm messing this up. Americans, he gonna cut that out, right? Americans, prisoners have been released from Russia. Yeah. And is it Belarus?
Yes.
They've unjustly held and they've been released. And the Budget Committee has sent forth its recommendations on President Trump's ideas that he wants to pass, whether it's related to security or energy and national defense. And so I just asked you, what stands out for you, and were these things expected in terms of the nomination? Because I know Tulsi Gabbard, it was questionable whether she would make it, and she's been confirmed. And so what stands out for you guys on these different priorities?
I think what stands out is that Donald Trump's not fooling around. He recognizes that he has a short time to do a lot, and a lot of pieces of the country were broken. And the traditional speed of Washington, D.C. is to take one piece at a time and try to fix it, and then talk about it for 3 years, and then eventually don't do anything. And he's saying, we've got so many things that need to be fixed to turn this country around that I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put fixes out there, and Congress needs to catch up. And and Congress, and this is one of the things I think the Senate in particular, but the House as well, have to adjust to. They're operating at the speed of Silicon Valley. Congress is operating at the speed of the stagecoach. And they have to, and the fact is Congress, the Senate in particular, needs to be meeting 6 days a week and taking Sunday off to rest. And they need to be processing.
That's a heavy lift.
Processing nominations every single day. He's got sub-cabinet people that need to be put into place. He's got a whole team. He's got probably 1,000 people that need to be confirmed. It's 800 people that need to be confirmed. He needs to get, when he puts those up, those people need to be dealt with immediately. So his team is in place right now because they're not going to be able to get the regulatory changes they need to make the energy piece work or make a lot of the overall economic pieces work. That's contingent upon taking down regulations that are designed to destroy the economy. And he needs his people in place to get that done.
I think you're absolutely right. There's so many different angles that Congress can take. You know, we anticipated more congressional review acts where Congress can go in and basically undo what was done in the last 6 months of the Biden administration. Biden administration sort of wanted to burn the House down on their way out and placing a lot of these regulations that they knew would get in the way of Trump's successes. And so, you know, we wish that Congress was moving faster. It seems that, you know, the small minority that is vocal, I think, is necessary in certain instances to make sure we're, you know, meeting our debt limits, that we're not overspending. I think that small minority has done more in terms of obstructionism than is necessary this early on. I think, you know, later on as we're getting towards the midterm elections and, you know, really determining what leadership will be in the next 2 years, I think that's a fine time to really raise your grievances and make a fight. But right now, it is so clear from the American people where they want this country to go in terms of an overwhelming election that Congress really needs to fall into place. And I'm not often on the side saying that. I like the pushback, but I think when it comes to something that's so clear and so across the board in terms of what Americans want, that we really need to ramp things up.
And to Jonathan's point, Marty, I believe it was a mandate from the American people. They want Congress to do more. And what are your thoughts on what?
Well, one thing, I don't want to get too in the weeds on this, but part of the reason that the House has not done as many of these congressional review acts is because it has an impact on the budget resolution. They have to do the budget resolution and the budget reconciliation bill, and it gets scored by the Congressional Budget Office and all these other things. So I think they're looking to do a number of these things in the budget reconciliation bill so they get credit for the savings in the budget reconciliation bill. And they did pass a bill called the Midnight Rules Bill that they would allow them to bundle a bunch of these disapproval resolutions into one vote. So that's got through the House by a 4-vote margin. The problem is that is legislation that would need a 60-vote threshold in the Senate, so it's very unlikely that it's actually going to get through the Senate. But if it could, that would enable them to do a whole bunch of these things all at once. So I think they'll be doing some of these, using the Congressional Review Act to claw back some of these regulations, but probably ones that don't have as much of a cost impact. It may have some other policy impact, but not the cost impact that's going to impact the way the budget bill goes. But I know that's getting a little in the weeds. I try not to get too deep.
Let me get less in the weeds on that just a little bit.
Okay.
The reason the Congressional Review Act is important on this, and the Congress doing it, is if President Trump takes a regulation back, the next president or any future president can just put that same regulation back into place. And you just have wash, rinse, repeat going back and forth. Once the Congress says, no, this regulation is against congressional will, congressional mandate, the next president cannot reinstate that. So Biden has tried to eliminate gas appliances, for instance, and as he was going out the door. Nobody heard about it, but that's what he tried to do. There's a regulation on the books. President Trump rescinded that regulation through an executive order. And the process will happen for them to rescind that regulation through the regular process. If Congress, however, does that, no future president can say, we're going to ban gas appliances. And that is the important distinction why Congress needs to act on Congressional Review Act, even if the president, through executive order or administrative function, effectively makes that, what they've done, not applicable. It's still in the books as a regulation. It needs to be taken out.
Well, I think it'd be hard to get rid of gas stoves for Congress because a lot of their wives might use gas stoves. That'd be a tough call there. But speaking of regulations and Congress' responsibility, what President Trump brought in was a guy named Elon Musk and DOGE, Department of what is it? The Department of Government Efficiency.
Yeah.
And he's been doing a lot of cost-cutting measures, or at least recommending them. He's examining USAID. He's examining the Department of Education where we need to make cuts. He's examining FEMA where we need to make cuts. And we're looking closely at that, and President Trump is looking closely at that. But with these recommendations, going back to your point, does Congress need to make these laws in order for them to be able to cut it, or can they do it without Congress approval? Well, because they're getting a lot of pushback.
The courts are going to decide that.
Yeah. Okay.
But there is something called the Impoundment Act, and the question will be, how much power does the President of the United States have to say, I'm not going to waste money? And things that I determine to be wasting money, claw back the money and return it to the Treasury. That's going to be a legal battle, and it's going to be a close legal battle. Where Congress can help is in their budget reconciliation bill or any of the appropriations bills they do. If they make it clear that the president is able to claw back money and rescind authorizations if he finds that they meet certain waste requirements, if they put that into those bills, then Congress will have taken an action to create the dynamic where President Trump will be able to say, there's $50 billion of wasteful spending here, we're not doing that. We're not spending that money. The most important thing that the Musk people have done so far is they're changing the payment systems out of the U.S. Department of Treasury, because we've had $50 billion of knowable fraud and maybe up to $100 billion of knowable fraud every single year of payments going out to people who don't have Social Security numbers and don't have any kind of identification on the record to show that they're actually eligible to receive a payment.
So that's a lot of fraud, and that's just what we know right now. I'm sure more will be discovered. And isn't Elon Musk really doing what President Trump said during the campaign. He said he would look into these things and he would make government more efficient.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely right. And it's in breaking up how DC works. Elon Musk, I think, exposed something that was very important, that DC works on sort of a non-complaint basis. Not that they don't complain themselves, a lot of complainers here, but if you complain to the federal government, it's like, oh, we want to do away with you. We don't want to take the time to actually work through your individual complaint or your request for a grant or a number of these things that actually require people to be behind their desks, approving or disapproving how our U.S. monies are spent. For far too long, individuals, certainly during COVID, working from home, not accountable to what it actually takes to make a decision. Businesses could never run in the same manner that the U.S. government is running. And so what Elon has exposed is that anytime a complaint came in, or the appearance of a fraud or something that was in fact fraudulent, the bureaucrats were just like, oh, well, just deal with it in the quickest manner possible, which is keeping the checks going out. And so it became advantageous to certain groups. There are lawyers that have been arrested for this. It became advantageous for folks gaming the system to always put it in sort of a complaint form. We need this money to keep coming out, or we'll complain about it. And that's what's sort of stoked the fires of this wastefulness. And so I think one of the best things that Elon has done is exposing the culture. And, as we go line by line and try to deal with the take care clause that was mentioned earlier in terms of the Impoundment Act, as we deal with the take care clause and what the president can actually do, the one thing that'll animate all of this is the culture saying, I didn't know this was going on. Now that I do know that this is going on, you all better fix it before we get a lot more upset. And that's the sort of fire that's being stoked that I think is excellent for all of us.
Excellent. And Marty, do you think what Elon Musk is doing is really promises made, promises kept?
Well, I think that's certainly what the president said, and he is doing what the president said he would do, and he is acting with the authority of the president. There'll be, there's give and take. There's going to be these things in the courts, and they're going to sort them out. The president said they'll abide by the courts, but then they'll try to appeal things where they think they're wrong. I think what Richard pointed out about these payment systems, I think that he's putting some checks into these payment systems, some ways to monitor the payment systems. So we've had a lot of money going out the door. A lot of the COVID money, for instance, that went out the door turned out to go to people in foreign countries and so on. So you've got to get some things in there so you can really track that money, make sure it's actually going to people who are supposed to get it and not being stolen, basically. By
and
people.
Knowing this, just remember, Willie Sutton was asked one time, why do you rob banks? And he said, that's because that's where the money is.
Right.
Well, if you're a cartel in Mexico or anywhere around the world, and you know that there's a system where they never say no, if you put in enough applicants, and you've got a whole bunch of people who can apply in the United States, guess what? You're going to put in a lot of applicants, and the cartel is going to get the VIG. So don't be surprised when we actually look at this if there isn't an actual RICO suit that can be brought by the Department of Justice against big players who are manipulating the system. And when a RICO suit allows you to take everything they got, and so the clawback effort on this $50 billion minimum a year could be significant against cartels and other organized crime figures.
Yeah, I'll just say, we're running out of time. And not cartels in like sort of the formal terroristic organization that's down at the Mexico border, although I think they're probably implicated. These are cartels working with suits and ties, on K Street, working amongst us. That's what's being exposed and broken up. And so all the consternation and the pushback you see from, the cash cow folks that aren't receiving their pipeline anymore, it's because you're messing with their money. So that's the real cartel and the deviousness that's going on here in D.C.
So the ones that are screaming the loudest are probably a big part of what's going on here.
That's right.
I've been around a long time. I've seen several different administrations, and all of them have promised to do what President Trump and his team are doing now. So I think the American people, for the majority, are happy to see what they're seeing. We'll be right back with another Cure America segment just shortly.
Today, a student in public school will pray or lead a Bible study. Today, a pastor will preach boldly the truth of the Scriptures without fear of the IRS. Today, the life of an innocent child will be saved, and a mother will experience the joy of a newborn baby. A distraught woman will find hope and choose life rather than death. Today, there is a strong voice defending God's created natural order of marriage and family. There is a defender of freedom in the courtroom and in the halls of Congress and in legislative bodies across the land. Today, all of this is possible because of the ministry of Liberty Counsel. People from all over America will find help and hope because of Liberty Counsel. The adversity they face will be turned into victory, case by case, law by law, person by person. Liberty Counsel is advancing religious freedom, the sanctity of human life, and the family through litigation, education, and public policy. And that is the mission of Liberty Counsel, to restore the culture by advancing life, liberty, and family.
Welcome back to Cure America, and we're going to make a detour to something that is of great concern to some Americans, and President Trump says it's one of his, I want to say he said it's a word that he really likes, tariffs. And he has put 25% tariffs on all aluminum coming in to the United States and steel imports, and they will be starting in the March time frame. He's also talking about tariffs on our allies, on some of their goods coming in with Canada and the UK, which is something that's surprising to a lot of people. But he's also talking about simplifying the rules. He's also talking about starting an area of government called the External Revenue Service. And so these tariffs are different, but he's also expressed in some of his speeches during the 1800s, America was the richest country because of tariffs. And so as we look at that, I want to ask the panel a question. Will these tariffs affect the American worker or the economy? Because one of President Trump's promises is that he will bring down inflation. And a lot of people are saying this is going to cause more inflation if he puts tariffs on this good. What are your thoughts on that? Will he be able to keep his promise if these tariffs go into place in March?
Yeah, well, I think it's an excellent question, and it's something that's been consistent even during the Reagan era. Trump was really big on pushing that, and what it was is, the conversation that you have with other countries in terms of their businesses or even U.S. businesses working overseas and attempting to ship back to the United States is saying, what are we going to cost you for the price of either transport or entering into the United States as a way of protecting U.S. businesses. So it's been sort of long-standing, decades-long policy that in preserving U.S. businesses and the ability for us to use the resources that are here, we're going to have other countries deal with us based on our basis. And what it does, I think, primarily is reinforces U.S. sovereignty. It says that, hey, we can make strong decisions for those that are within our borders that we have to take care of. What it also does is pushes other nations not just to look internally themselves, which I think is a good repudiation of the entire globalism system, and allows individual countries to do what's best for them. But it benefits the American worker. It benefits the American companies. It holds U.S. companies more accountable to how they're dealing with the rest of the world. U.S. businesses aren't a diplomatic arm of the United States, but the culture that we create in other countries of either exploiting their goods and sending them back to the United States, that's not been beneficial for us. So even if it does temporarily affect our relationship with our allies or how we've consistently done business around the world, I think in the long run, the focus that we have on the resources that are here in America, making sure that businesses are operating ethically within the United States and that other countries that have been taking advantage of America are having to pay up. I think in the long run, it'll work out despite, maybe a temporary shift in prices that will always occur when you're going in there and doing surgery.
So Jonathan's saying this will work in the long run. And I'm gonna ask a short run question. We'll go back to inflation as well. It seems like they're working because when he tried to send the immigrants back over to Colombia, yep. And as soon as he threatened tariffs, because Colombia wouldn't take those immigrants back, and as soon as President Trump said, okay, we're gonna put 25% tariffs on all your goods coming over to America, and in 1 week we're gonna put another 50% on it, it seems like they're doing something in the short run and they'll do something in the long run. Well, and will it affect us in inflation-wise?
President Trump uses tariffs as a foreign policy tool. And you want access to our markets, you have to be friendly to us. Now, he makes a good point in terms of Europe, for instance, has pretty significant tariffs on automobiles and the like. So American automobiles being imported from the U.S. to Europe is very expensive. It raises the price up significantly. In terms of the inflation question, I can answer specifically on the steel and aluminum tariffs that were done in the first administration with China. Okay, initially, the cost of steel and aluminum went up for about 3 months. And then what China did is they subsidized their steel and aluminum industries to eat the cost of the tariffs. And so what the tariffs actually did is they put a tax on the government of China to sell aluminum and steel here. Now, the intent of the tariffs is to have a strong domestic aluminum and steel industry.
Right.
And what happened in what China then did is they shipped a whole bunch of steel to Mexico and Canada. And Mexico and Canada were then stamping it like it was made in Mexico and Canada, taking advantage of the USMCA trade agreement. And so they were then doing that. So then Trump said, no, we're going to put a tariff on that too. And that kind of went away. So the fact is Donald Trump's using a word called reciprocity. And reciprocity means if you're not treating our products fairly, then we're going to treat your products exactly the same way. And it changes the world trade system that's been in existence since about 1947, which was designed to hold the Soviet Union at bay and create, in a world that was completely economically broken, create a free enterprise in countries that were just broken. And we were essentially the donor state. Sell your stuff here, we'll buy it, we're not going to charge you money, and you can protect your industries. We're no longer in that world.
Okay.
And he's changing that world. And a lot of people are vested in that world.
Yeah, I would say to that point, the economic implications of that global system has meted out in several other areas across our society. And so if we want to sort of bring it back home to what it means to break up the globalist ideology, not just in our healthcare or in the economic realm, but this idea that the U.S. as an individual entity has such a belongingness to the rest of the world, even if the rest of the world disagrees with us or is in full animus against us or is an enemy of us, we still have to sort of play in this altruistic fashion where we're getting taken advantage of just so we can be nice and play nice in the rest of the world. That has been broken up, and so much of us being taken advantage of either through USAID and the foreign press in other nations or outright terrorist organizations is because the United States for so long has saying, hey, we operate in the world in a manner that we just have to keep playing nice and hopefully they'll play nice back. And that is not the case. So I think it is a very fine time for us to tighten up our belt and deal with nations based on how good they are towards us and not some altruistic manner that honestly harms the American culture and harms the American worker.
Well, Jonathan brings up a good point. It's a saying that says the nice guys finish last. And we've been last for a long time, and President Trump says he's putting us first. And as you mentioned, Jonathan talked about, it might be a short-term increase in prices, but they will find a way to bring those prices down as they ship these goods in. So Marty, so what are your thoughts on the tariffs? And I'm gonna ask you a different question in terms of reflection, but do you think it's just President Trump going to one of Richard's points, it's the art of the deal, actually? Is it the art of the deal as he chooses?
Well, I certainly think it is. He certainly does get changes in policy. I think one of the things you have to look at, though, is if you're primarily using tariffs as a hammer to get people to change policies when you think that they're not acting properly, you're not. Then if you pull the tariffs back, if they do what you want them to do, you're not going to get that revenue. So I think to count on tariffs as a long-term source of revenue, I don't think is a good idea. And if you have too many of them, you are going to, run the risk of those prices going up on those products. But the other thing is, this doesn't happen in a vacuum. These countries may retaliate, and certainly the European Union and Canada are talking about retaliating. And if they start putting higher prices, tariffs and other kind of restrictions on U.S. goods, you could raise the cost of other goods that we get from them. But we do have to become more self-sufficient in many ways, and things like steel and aluminum are really kind of part of our foundation, that we really need our industrial foundation, because we can't be held hostage by other countries, particularly China, as we saw during the pandemic with China hoarding medical supplies and so on. But there's a lot of other rare earth minerals, all kinds of other things that we have to be concerned about, particularly with China.
And what Marty mentioned about the tariffs and our concerns about them, putting them on us. When we look at Canada, I think 2% of our GDP is based on their imports, and I think about 30-something% of their GDP is based on what we send to them. And the same is true with Mexico. Can they hurt us a lot with tariffs if we put them on them?
We've had a partnership with Canada and Mexico, economic partnership for a while, since NAFTA. And the fact is, we do have an integrated economy. You get parts made in Canada that get treated the same as parts made in America, at least almost the same, in terms of making American-made cars. You have, we destroyed our forestry industry in the Northwest, and we import timber from Canada. So if we want to build houses with timber, we rely on Canadian timber. It doesn't mean we don't have timber that we can cut, but we have to have a willingness to bear the environmental cost of that in order to do that. So we've effectively deconstructed aspects of our economy because of the relationship with Canada and Mexico. So that's going to be part of the equation, figuring that out. I think that it's in everybody's interest for us to get along. And so that's number one. But the thing that changed the world is China, because China's abused the system. And China has used the money they're making off of America to go and attack America around the world. And so Donald Trump is saying we're no longer going to finance China's attack on America. And that's the challenge he's giving to Europe. And one prediction, I predict that there'll be a trade agreement. I'm not going to call it a free trade agreement. I think it'll be a reciprocal trade agreement between the U.S. and the United Kingdom. Donald Trump wanted to do that when the United Kingdom left the European Union, and it would have been a Trump 2 second term agenda item. I think you'll see in the next year a trade agreement that's a fair, honest trade agreement between us and the UK. I also think we're going to see a lot more joint economic activity between the United States and India. India being the supply chain offset to the Chinese, because they have the similar kind of labor advantage, cheap labor advantage. So I think those are the two countries to take a look, keep an eye on in terms of how our trade is going to be kind of shifting.
Okay. It sounds like to me the tariffs, we've been nice guys, and we do have these good relationships with Mexico and Canada. And I don't often quote Dr. Phil, but I will quote him now. Is President Trump really saying with these tariffs, looking at reciprocity, Dr. Phil says this: you teach people how to treat you. Yeah. And he is teaching the rest of the world how to treat America. If you mistreat us, or if you're not being fair to us, we're going to put tariffs on you so we can have a more fair relationship. Would you say that's the case?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And we don't have to be big and boisterous or have machismo about the position that the United States has in the world and use it to our advantage. I think what's always been a culture in the U.S. from its outset is the Judeo-Christian principles that do operate in spheres of charity and altruism in the right sense, or living well with our neighbors and those around us. I think we will always have that, just because it is the Judeo-Christian ethic. As long as that's the core of what our culture is, that's going to be reflected ultimately in how we deal. But you do have to love those that are closest to you first. A husband has to love his wife, love his children, before he loves his neighbors and the rest of his community. I think what we're seeing now is this understanding that you have to take care of what's closest to you, and that'll make you more effective in your charity and in how the Lord leads. That'll make you more effective in how you deal with those around you.
Jonathan brings up a good point as we come to a close of this segment. We do unto others as you have them do unto you. So there's this Judeo-Christian ethic, and it's fair actually to teach people how to treat you, how to be kind to one another. We're partners, and so these tariffs, we're going to hear a lot more about them, especially if these ones go into effect in March, and we're going to see how it balances out in the short term as well as the long term, and hopefully it will be good for the American economy, and I think it will. I think it will. We'll see you in our next segment. Welcome back. We've talked about a lot of activity that's going on in the Trump administration. There have been a whirlwind of these executive orders. He's received some of his appointments that he's wanted, and we've talked about tariffs. We haven't talked a lot about his tax cuts, but I'm gonna give the panel an opportunity just to really express some other thoughts that they may have. Since we've talked about so much today in this segment, what are some ideas or thoughts that you have about what President Trump is doing that you want to talk about that's more affects your organizations?
Well, as Americans for Limited Government, I will tell you the DOGE stuff matters. Cutting the size of government matters. But I think what people need to understand is making government more efficient isn't limited government. Making government more efficient is a process. Limited government is the direction you give and the guardrails you put on what government can and shouldn't be doing. And so an efficient government that's doing bad things, see COVID, an efficient government that's doing bad things can be very, very bad. So while we're cheering on Department of Government Efficiency, I'm working to make certain that guardrails of constitutional governance, limited governance, is where these are the guardrails that these actions are taking place within. In terms of the funding, we're going to have 4 different funding fights in the next 2 months, and they're just beginning. And we're going to have to fund the government because the government's funded to early March. Okay. We're already past the debt ceiling, and they're taking extraordinary measures to make it so we can continue borrowing money. So we're going to have a debt ceiling fight. Some of these may be bunched together. We've got a budget that we're going to have to pass that's going to have a lot of fight around it. And we've got the whole tax issue. What tax cuts are going to be able to be put into something called a budget reconciliation, and that's a fight that's going to be happening. And all these things, Washington doesn't move that fast. And in 2 months, they're going to have to deal with all of these things, and that's a lot for a place that's used to moving at a different pace to be able to deal with.
They might have to take a page out of the DOGE playbook.
I would just say, people, that's the thing to engage in. That's what Congress is going to be paying attention to. And truthfully, it's what matters, because DOGE can say whatever they want. But if Congress says we're going to continue spending at the same level, so what? You're just shifting where you're spending it, but you're not actually cutting the size and scope of government, because that's Congress's job.
You make some really good points, Rich and Jonathan. And how does some of these points that Richard is bringing out and these changes that the Trump administration is making affect what you're doing? Yeah, well, just dovetail on what Rich is saying in a quick sentence. You know, the Democrats of November, December, and January aren't the Democrats that we're seeing today. So they have their press conferences and all these fights that they want to put on for their people in order to say, hey, we're pushing back against Elon Musk and the Trump agenda. So you need certain amount of Democrat votes to get any one of our budget reconciliation or policies through. The minority, in terms of the Democrats, have a lot of power. Necessarily in the system, they have a lot of power. And so there's going to be a lot of things that we're going to be uncomfortable with that will probably continue to be funded if we do not make a fight about it. And I'm thinking of Planned Parenthood and a number of these social issues that are just packaged in to whatever continuing spending that we'll have. So that's a fight there, and obviously pay attention to the players making noise on either side, particularly the Democrats that see themselves now as being a buffer against Trump and Elon Musk. But one thing that Trump has done that has really benefited the folks of faith, particularly the folks that are watching this, is start an office really to restore religious expression and freedom of religion. And he's done so bringing it inside of the White House, where usually it's just an advisory group. He's brought it inside of the White House with in actual meats and bones where they can actually do something. And he signed an executive order to rid the government of anti-Christian bias. And you think of what anti-Christian bias has there been? Well, in the past 4 years, the Biden administration, through its Justice Department, has called parents domestic terrorists if they're upholding male and female standards in terms of girls' sports and locker rooms. Told his Department of Justice to go after them, parents that had concerns about what kids were being taught in schools. Biden has gone after them. This Department of State exporting the LGBT agenda all across the world. The Department of Health and Human Services, manufacturing and allowing through the FDA at large something like 70,000 abortion pills and abortions to be sent into our communities. All of this has been really targeted at individuals of faith that have strong perspectives on us being able to worship God, yes,
privately in our own homes and in our churches, but also go out in the public square and continue to express that faith and not have government stand in the way of us doing so. So something that Trump has done in the last week that is incredible is saying that we're going to stop this anti-Christian bias. We're not going to keep picking off pro-life protesters off the sidewalk and throwing them in jail for years and years at a time. We're not going to allow the Department of Labor to pick winners and losers based on an individual's choice about the vaccine and their religious convictions about the vaccine. These are all things that Biden has done for several years that Trump has put into place now, the right players and the right policy to start reversing that. And that's really going to open the door for faith once again to thrive in this country, for expression to be open and not have the risk of being threatened into silence because of what you believe. And what that culture does, that culture, that Judeo-Christian culture does, will inform how we make any of these budget decisions, and any, where our treasure is will follow where our heart is. And so unleashing once again religion and faith in this country, I think, is going to have a net benefit effect for this culture, and much of the problems that we've spoken to can be dealt with if we have the right heart perspective and the right spiritual perspective.
And that's a good point, and really that goes back to the First Amendment. Freedom of expression, freedom of religion, and he's going back to our First Amendment rights as American. That's what Americans want. And a lot of these changes, you mentioned Elon Musk is really an advisor. He can't make any laws, he can't enact any laws, but he's an advisor doing something that Congress should have been doing a long time ago. And as we look at that, Marty, and what Jonathan has said, if you want to comment on that, or what do you think, what's near and dear to your heart that we may have not talked about, or you want to just expand on?
Well, some of these executive orders are given instructions to particular agencies, and some of them are more government-wide. For instance, in this area with protecting religious liberty, this is all of the agencies need to look at what's going on within their agencies and make sure that's happening. Also, when they want to root out this DEI, that has to be done throughout. Just about every department has a civil rights office in it, for instance. So these are civil rights issues. These are protecting religious liberty as a civil rights issue. Treating people equally, not judging people by the content, by the color of their skin or their gender and so on. Those are civil rights issues. So we have to make sure that the law is applied, and those agencies are doing that the right way, that they're protecting the rights of the pro-life protesters and that sort of thing, because they're protecting doctors and nurses who don't want to be forced to perform abortions. The Biden administration was not protecting them, and in fact, in some cases, actually working against their interests when things like that were going on. So I think that this is something that we really need to see these agencies now implement this agenda very vigorously. I would also like to see them, given the model that Jonathan is talking about with the faith-based office, the president reinstituted this global health pro-life policy, the Geneva Consensus Declaration, and we need someone to shepherd that. I mean, Marco Rubio and some of these others have a lot of things on their plate. They need to get somebody in there to shepherd that initiative, and I've recommended somebody who I think would be the ideal person to do that. So I really would like to see them do that and make sure that that happens around the world, because the U.S. interests are being undermined when we're trampling on the values of countries that should be our allies.
Do you think, as DOGE unpacks and uncovers, I think the next department he's going to is the Department of Education, is what I'm hearing. I've read also that President Trump wants to eliminate the Department of Education. How do you think that will have an effect on our states?
Well, first of all, the Congress has to act to do that, because Congress actually voted to create it. So he can't eliminate the whole thing, unlike like USAID was created based on executive order. So he could eliminate USAID based on just killing that executive order. So it's just a different situation. But what he can do is he can transfer a lot of the functions of the Department of Labor or Department of Education to other departments. For instance, a lot of the training functions that a Department of Education are school-based training programs. Hence, who does training programs? Department of Labor does training programs. So you could have that. You could have, all the student loans. Those never should be in the Department of Education. They should be at Treasury, where they actually deal with this stuff. So you move that to Treasury. So you can take a lot of the component parts of Department of Education and dismantle it, and then go to Congress and say, we want to eliminate the remaining bureaucracy that serves no purpose. And that would be how it would happen, because you're still going to have an investment in jobs, investment in people and jobs. You're still going to have student loans, and government took that over under Obamacare. People don't realize that, but the government took over the student loans under Obamacare. It was under a Fannie Mae kind of situation called Sallie Mae, where it was a joint private-public entity before that did it. Okay. Government fully took it over on Obamacare, and you see the interest, you've seen the dependence on it skyrocket.
Right.
And they created the very problem that Biden was trying to solve by making it so nobody had to pay their loans back. So yeah, I think you'll see a dismantling of the Department of Education. And once the dismantling has occurred, then he'll go to Congress and he'll say, let's get rid of all the little pieces that don't need to be there.
Yeah, I would say on the education department, we got to realize that it's only 50 years old, right? So it's not something it's not a founding father project. It's not part and parcel of what's necessary to run the government, having a Department of Education. Plus, at the time that the department was created, we were #1 in the world for reading, writing, and arithmetic. 50 years later, we're not that. So
we're in the 20s.
We're in the So lower percentile of performance. So that means the department has done the exact opposite of what the education department was settled to do. The only thing it's done is prop up the teachers union. It's given a consistent cash cow to entities that are surrounding the education of our children that have no interest in really making our workforce or our education force the best that it can be. They're pushing things like the LGBT agenda, teaching pornography within schools. That's the standards that have come out across the Department of Education. When that is dismantled and local control, where parents are feeding into the Board of Education, parent-teacher organizations and meetings are the ones controlling at the local level what curriculum is taught, that begins to restore the community standards that we need in order to get our children back to where they're the highest performers in the world.
So do you, Marty, think they will be able to dismantle it, going with Jonathan and Rich? Do you think that's a possibility? You've been around government at least 40 years, I think, so you've seen things happen that I've never seen. And so do you think he's going to be successful in dismantling it in order to break it up and eventually get rid of it, hopefully?
Well, I would normally be inclined to say what Richard said, is that they're going to need legislation to do that, but somehow Donald Trump seems to find a way to do things. They're going to push the envelope and as far as they can. One of the things I think they can do beyond transferring programs to different agencies is to use block grants. Rather than having all of these programs, individual programs, put them into one block grant, cut the level of spending, send it back to the states, and that way the federal government can move out, and that gives you more of a justification to shut down these departments once you turn more of it over to the states. I think the one thing in the Department of Education where they're going to really have to be careful is in this area of special education for people with disabilities. That has a great deal of support. So they're going to have to make sure that they continue that, and probably has a federal role. But some of these other things are going to have to be, I think, turned over to the states, and not just in the Department of Education, but many other agencies. There are Labor, Health and Human Services, and so on, Commerce Department. There are various different programs that you can send back to the states, and with much fewer reporting requirements and lower levels of spending. Republican governors in particular are happy to take that trade-off. Give us lower spending, but give us more latitude to run these programs the way we think they should be run, and to prioritize the things that we think are most important in our own states.
It sounds like there's a whole lot of work to be done here in Washington, and I think we have the right president to make it happen. And just going back to the Department of Education, it definitely needs to go back to the states. That's where it started. It was mentioned earlier. It's only been around 50 years. I think it was Jimmy Carter, 1979 is when it started. So we had a country for almost 200 years or over 200 years, and we did need a Department of Education, so we probably don't need it now. Thank you for being here today, and remember, in all your ways, acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths.